I walked into the house with the usual grit on my boots and sawdust, still clinging to my jeans. Another 12-hour shift, another long day of trying to keep our family afloat. I had a box of donuts in one hand. Figured I'd surprise the kids after dinner. I was already rehearsing how I'd joke with my daughter Harper about her sweet tooth, maybe ruffle Mason's hair like I always do. I thought I was coming home. Instead, I walked into hell. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew something was off. The living room was half empty. Our wedding photo gone. The kids' toys packed into boxes. And then I heard her voice. Cold, sharp, final. You're a total failure. I'm taking the kids and all our money. Melanie stood at the top of the stairs like a judge handing down a life sentence. Her brother Troy was smirking by the door, holding a box of my son's clothes. And in that second, everything I built, everything I sacrificed, collapsed. But they didn't know. I wasn't the one about to lose everything. If you've ever been betrayed and forced to rebuild, I want to say thank you for sticking through this story. Drop a 1 in the comments if this hit home. And tell me, would you ever take them back? Or would you walk away like I did? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This channel is for every man who's been through hell and came out stronger. I wasn't always a man who looked over his shoulder. For most of my life, I believed that if you showed up, worked hard, and kept your word, the world would eventually meet you halfway. I'm a 47-year-old contractor in Charlotte, North Carolina. Own my own remodeling business. Never miss a day on the job unless it was one of the kids' birthdays or someone was in the hospital. I built my life the way I build kitchens. Carefully, precisely, with my bare hands and no shortcuts. I married Melanie when I was 33. She was smart, ambitious, and beautiful in a way that drew attention when we walked into a room. We had 2 kids together, Harper, 9, and Mason, 7. They were my world. Every late night, I spent hauling lumber or installing cabinets was for them. I missed things, recitals, back-to-school nights, dinners. But I thought it was a fair trade for the life I was helping to build. The cracks didn't appear all at once. It was little things. Melanie started locking her phone when she used to leave it on the kitchen counter. She began taking long drives to clear her head after dinner, even when the kids were begging her to stay for movie night. When I brought it up, she'd sigh, tell me I was paranoid or worse, say I was too busy at work to notice how unhappy she'd been. I chalked it up to stress. I thought we just needed time to reconnect. I had no idea I was being erased from my own family story. That Thursday started like any other. I finished a backsplash job early and figured I'd come home while it was still light out. Maybe surprise the kids. Maybe sit down for dinner like a real family. But when I pulled into the driveway, I knew something wasn't right. Troy's black Dodge Charger was parked an angle across my lawn, his trunk open. He was hauling boxes, my kids' backpacks, Mason's baseball glove, Harper's favorite books, into his car like it was just another errand. I froze. Then I saw the front door wide open and heard Melanie's voice from inside. I stepped into the house and dropped the box of donuts. My boots stuck to the floor in places, like the house had already started rejecting me. The living room was bare, shelves empty, the couch cushions gone, our wedding photo gone. The smell of my cologne still lingered in the air, but it felt like walking into someone else's home. And then I heard Melanie, standing at the top of the stairs, arms folded, with this look on her face like she just won a game I didn't know we were playing. You're a total failure, she said, her voice calm but laced with venom. I'm taking the kids and all our money. Behind her, Troy laughed, just a short, smug chuckle, as he carried out another box. Told you he'd come crawling back early, he said. Should have changed the locks. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain was still trying to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. 0. Checking? 0. Joint savings? 0. Even the college fund we'd been building since Harper was born, wiped clean. I checked the transactions. All moved that morning into an account I didn't recognize. Where's Harper? Where's Mason? I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. They're safe, Melanie said. With my mother. I didn't want them here for this. They don't need to see their father unravel. I turned to Troy. You think this is funny?" He smirked and pulled a bat from his trunk. "No, but this part is." He walked over to my truck and, without hesitation, smashed the passenger side mirror. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Then he went for the headlights, shattering them one by one. I just stood there, gripping my phone, heart pounding so hard it felt like I was going to black out. But I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't swing back. I hit record. Melanie's expression shifted as soon as she saw me filming. "What the hell are you doing?" "Keep going," I said, my voice low. "That's about 3,000 in damages. All on video." Troy dropped the bat like it was burning his hand. Melanie's voice rose. "You're threatening us now? Filming like some creep?" I walked past her into the house, my house, and headed straight for the office. Every document I could think of, birth certificates, tax returns, insurance papers, I stuffed into a duffel bag. I knew this wasn't a conversation anymore. This was war. As I walked back out, Melanie stood in the doorway, arms still folded, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes now. "You're pathetic," she spat. "Have fun sleeping in your truck." I looked at her, really looked at her, like I was seeing her for the first time. "You know what's funny?" I said, "For someone so smart, you really don't pay attention to the important stuff. But you'll figure it out. Soon." Then I left, not because I was defeated, but because I knew the smartest play wasn't to fight fire with fire. It was to wait, document, and burn the whole thing down legally. The heartbreak hit later, not right away. At first, I just felt hollow, like someone had hit a mute button on my life. I sat in a budget motel room, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. I wanted to scream, punch something, call Melanie and demand an explanation, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Names, accounts, dates, a plan. Because I wasn't going to beg to keep my family. I was going to prove that I was the only one who'd been holding it together all along. By the time Melanie was popping champagne with her friends on Instagram and writing cryptic captions about new beginnings, I was already 3 steps ahead. She thought she'd gutted me, financially, emotionally, legally. And to be honest, I let her think that. I let her believe she'd broken a man who had built that house with his own hands. Let her soak in the applause from her echo chamber while I stayed quiet. The truth? I was never as broke as she hoped I'd be. 3 years ago, I started a second business. At the time, I didn't even know why. I just felt this instinct to separate things. Maybe it was all those small comments she made back then, the way she flinched whenever I talked about expanding the company, like she wanted me successful, but not too successful. So I registered a second LLC under my father's middle name and built it from the ground up. Small custom cabinetry jobs at first, then word of mouth spread. I started pulling in contract from boutique hotels and interior designers. None of it touched our joint accounts. Every dollar went into its own banking system, its own bookkeeping, its own set of records. She never noticed. She thought I was just working longer hours on the same old job, always tired, always distracted. I was actually outscaling our old business tenfold. Quietly, methodically, legally. I paid every tax, kept every receipt. It was above board, but it was also under her radar. I created something separate not out of spite, but self-preservation. And now, standing in the middle of that dingy motel room, staring at the void she left in her wake, I realized just how important that decision had been. While Melanie drained our savings, I was watching untouched funds sit safely behind business protections she couldn't penetrate. The best part? She'd helped me file the paperwork. Signed it herself years ago when I told her it was for liability protection. She didn't even read it, just smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd be home for dinner. I remember looking at her signature that night in the motel, tracing the ink with my thumb. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something colder, cleaner clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when a storm rips your life apart and you realize the foundation is still standing. She thought she left me bankrupt. What she didn't realize is that I'd already built something she couldn't touch, because while she was planning her exit, I was building a future. And now that future was mine, free and clear. The first few nights in that motel were quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The air was cold, the walls were thin, and the bed creaked every time I shifted my weight. But it wasn't the noise that kept me up, it was the silence in my chest. The kind of emptiness you feel when the people you bled for decide you're disposable. I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing. Legal forms, account statements, timestamps, witness lists. I filled notebooks. I printed everything I had. I called my accountant, then a lawyer named Louise, who came highly recommended by a client I trusted. She had the kind of calm that made you feel like you'd already won. They got sloppy, she said, spreading out the documents across her desk. This is going to get interesting. And it did. I moved out of the motel within the week and into a modest apartment not far from the kids' school. It wasn't anything fancy, a small 2-bedroom unit with beige walls and worn carpet, but I made sure it felt like home. I bought Harper the same string light she'd had in her reading corner, even ordered Mason's bunk bed from memory. It wasn't about winning them back. It was about giving them something real when everything else in their world was unraveling. Meanwhile, Melanie was curating her new life online, like it was a brand. Her Facebook was full of smiling selfies, wine nights, and cryptic quotes about finally choosing herself. She'd post filtered photos of brunches with women I'd never met, tag locations we used to visit as a family, and throw out captions like, "Sometimes you have to let go of the past to protect your peace." I didn't respond. Not once. No angry comments, no tell-all posts. I kept my profile quiet, updated only with work photos and the occasional snapshot of the kids building a pillow fort or eating pancakes in the new place. I let the silence speak for itself. The people who mattered noticed. Clients reached out. Neighbors messaged me. "You okay?" they'd ask. "She's different lately." I didn't have to say a word. I just kept showing up, doing what I'd always done. Working, parenting, rebuilding. Then one night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Harper, sent from Melanie's number. "Dad, why can't we come back home?" My hands tightened around the phone. I stared at the screen, rereading it like maybe the words would change. A minute later, a voice message followed. It was Melanie, sounding annoyed. "Sorry, Harper found my phone. Don't be getting their hopes up. You're not the parent they need right now." I sat there, jaw locked, every muscle in my body screaming to drive over and bring my kids home. But I didn't. I just saved the message, added it to the folder marked custody evidence, and kept going. That weekend, I FaceTimed the kids. Harper looked tired. Mason barely spoke. They told me about the new condo, how Troy was around a lot, and how Melanie had friends over almost every night. Harper asked if I still had her books. I told her I kept all of them, every single one. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's when I made a promise to myself, not just to win custody, not just to survive this, but to make sure my kids never felt that kind of confusion again. I couldn't fix what Melanie broke, but I could give them something better. Stability, safety, and the truth. And that truth was beginning to catch up to her, faster than she realized. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the message. Just a simple text. "Ronald, can we talk? It's important. Carolyn." At first, I wasn't sure if it was some kind of trap. Carolyn had been Melanie's best friend for nearly a decade. They were inseparable wine nights, gym classes, weekend getaways. The last person I expected to hear from, especially after everything went down. But something in my gut told me to respond. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop 2 towns over, the kind of place without too many prying eyes. She showed up alone, sunglasses on, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what she's done," she said, sliding into booth across from me. "And I can't keep pretending I don't." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. I didn't know what I expected, maybe a few screenshots, maybe something vague. But what she showed me hit like a hammer to the chest. There were months' worth of texts between her and Melanie. Voice memos, DMs, plans, schemes. In one message, Melanie bragged about how Ronald's too busy building shelves to notice what I'm doing behind them. In another, She described how she and Troy were going to ruin me in court by painting me as an absent, emotionally abusive father. He's never around, she'd written. Everyone will believe me. I've been planting the seeds for months. I should have been furious. But what Carolyn showed me next made the betrayal cut even deeper. She hesitated, like she didn't want to say it out loud. There's more, she said quietly. It's not just Troy helping her. She's been seeing someone else too. Someone close to you. Then she showed me a photo. It was Melanie at a rooftop bar, laughing, leaning against a man in a charcoal blazer, Mark, my former business partner, the man who used to ride in my truck, eat at my dinner table, and teach Mason how to hold a wrench. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Mark. I asked, though I already knew. Carolyn nodded. They'd been meeting up for over a year. Melanie told me it started as just dinner, but I saw the messages. It's been physical for a long time. My mind flashed back to Mason's birthday party 6 months ago. Mark had shown up with a gift and a smile, helped me set up the grill, stood beside me in the yard while the kids ran around. That night, Melanie told me she was too tired to help clean up and went to bed early. I'd spend the rest of the evening outside with Mark, drinking beer, talking shop, while he knew exactly what he'd been doing behind my back. He watched my son's birthday. I whispered, my voice barely audible. He watched my son blow out candles while he was sleeping with my wife. Carolyn looked down, ashamed. I didn't know how deep it went until recently. But when she tried to seduce my husband to back up her story, blackmail him into testifying against you, I knew I had to come forward. My breath caught. She did what? Yeah, she said. He turned her down, recorded the conversation, and told me everything. She threatened him, said if he didn't help ruin you in court, she'd tell people he came on to her. I leaned back in the booth, the weight of it all pressing down like cinder blocks. It wasn't just betrayal. It was warfare. Planned, rehearsed, weaponized. And the worst part? I trusted every single one of them. But now I had something just as valuable as their lies. Proof. Proof that they didn't just want to leave. They wanted to destroy. But they underestimated the one thing I still had. Time. And I was about to use every second of it to burn their house of cards to the ground. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse in a navy button-down and the same steel-toed boots I wore on job sites. Louise met me at the steps, calm as ever, holding a leather case like it was a sword. Let her perform, she said. It'll only help us. Inside, Melanie had already taken her seat at the petitioner's table. She wore a pale blue dress and that innocent expression she used to flash at my parents when she wanted to avoid hard questions. Her new lawyer, some flashy downtown guy who probably charged by the syllable, started the hearing with the usual script. He painted her as a devoted mother abandoned by a selfish workaholic, claimed I was too busy chasing money to notice my wife's emotional distress, claimed the kids were struggling because of my absence. I didn't react, not when they showed photos of my truck, trying to prove I was unstable. Not even when Melanie wiped away a fake tear and said I'd grown cold and unpredictable in the last year. I just waited because I knew what was coming. When it was Louise's turn, she didn't raise her voice. She simply opened the folder and began. First, the bank records, showing the joint accounts drained in one morning, including the kids' college fund. Then the video of Troy smashing my truck while Melanie stood there and watched. Then came the voice message from Melanie herself, telling me not to get the kids' hopes up. Then the emails, the screenshots, the messages to Carolyn, the blackmail attempt against her husband, the photos of Melanie and Mark, time-stamped during the hours she claimed she was attending therapy. Melanie squirmed in her chair. Her lawyer scrambled, whispering furiously. But Louise wasn't done. Your Honor, she said, pulling out the last piece. We also have written testimony from both children's teachers. They describe Miss Pickup's erratic behavior and concerns about the mother's presence of strange men at her home during school nights. The judge raised an eyebrow, then leaned forward. Any explanation for this? Melanie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then Carolyn entered the room. Melanie's face went pale. She looked over, eyes wide, like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she thought Carolyn was there to back her up, but when Carolyn sat on our side of the courtroom, you could almost hear Melanie's heart crack. Carolyn testified calmly, clearly, stating what she knew, what she saw, and how Melanie had orchestrated the entire setup. By the time she finished, Melanie had stopped trying to hide her panic. She crossed and uncrossed her legs, bit her lip until it bled, whispered frantically to her lawyer, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in one sitting. The judge sat back and looked between us. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just nodded once. Given the evidence presented, he said, "Primary physical custody will be awarded to Mr. Walker. Mrs. Walker is granted supervised visitation until further review. Additionally, all financial discrepancies will be forwarded to a civil investigator." Melanie stood up and shouted something incoherent. Something about me setting her up, about betrayal, about how she'd never really loved me anyway. The judge banged the gavel once and told her to control herself. Security approached. She sat back down, defeated, shaking, eyes glazed over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I just stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom knowing one thing. The truth had finally caught up, and the storm she tried to bury me in, I just walked out of it, still standing. A week after the custody hearing, just when I thought the dust might finally settle, Troy decided to put on a show of his own. I was having breakfast at Harper and Mason at the local diner we always went on Sundays, a small, family-run place where the waitresses knew our names, and the cook gave Mason extra bacon without asking. We were halfway through our pancakes when I heard the familiar growl of a Dodge Charger outside. The kids didn't notice, but I did. My stomach tensed, not from fear, just the way a man braces when storm's about to hit. Troy barged in, loud and swaggering, eyes locked on me like he'd been rehearsing this. "You think you're a hero now," he shouted across the diner, drawing every eye in the room. "You think you can ruin my sister and walk around like nothing happened?" I stayed seated, calm. Mason shrunk down in his seat. Harper's fork froze in midair. I gently pushed him behind me as I stood. Mike, the owner, a 62-year-old Vietnam vet who ran the diner like a second home, stepped forward and said, "You need to leave, son." Troy didn't like that. He shoved Mike, hard enough to send him stumbling back into a table. That was the moment 3 people stood up, phones already recording. Another called the police. I didn't move. I just looked at Troy and said, "Now everyone sees who you really are." The cops showed up within minutes. By then, the footage had already been posted online. Small-town Facebook groups lit up like a bonfire. The guy who trashed a man's truck and tried to help steal his kids had now assaulted a well-loved diner owner in front of families and cameras. By that afternoon, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance in town who said, "Troy's name is mud. Investors are pulling out. His little consulting business just went up in flames." I didn't need to lift a finger. Karma had a front row seat. Watching him yell as he was cuffed and stuffed into the back of a squad car felt less like revenge and more like gravity. Inevitable, unstoppable, and well-earned. It was almost 3 months after the courtroom storm had passed when she showed up at my door. A Thursday evening, quiet, unremarkable, until I heard the knock. I opened it to find Melanie standing there, her makeup smudged, hair tied back in a kind of rush bun she only wore when everything in her life was unraveling. Her eyes were bloodshot, and in her hands, she clutched something like it might anchor her. A photo of the kids, the one we took at the lake this summer before everything fell apart. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to feel something again. She took a trembling breath, looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look angry or smug. She looked lost. "I miss my family, Ronald. I miss you. I've changed. Can't we just start over? For the kids?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door or throw accusations. I just stood there, one hand on the doorknob, the other resting lightly against the frame, and took her like a man observing the wreckage of a house he once built. "You didn't miss me when you called me a failure," I said, slow and even, You didn't miss me when you emptied our accounts or told our kids I didn't care about them. You only missed the version of me that let you walk over him. That man doesn't live here anymore." Her lip quivered. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. The silence stretched out like a rope between us. Finally, I exhaled and softened my tone, not out of love, but out of clarity. "You can still be their mom. They need one. But that has to come from a place of honesty and effort, not convenience. If you want to be in their lives, you show up, sober, present, steady, not when it's hard for you. Always. Otherwise, you're not helping. You're just haunting." Tears streamed down her face now, but I didn't move to comfort her. That wasn't my role anymore. She looked at the photo in her hands, then up at the home behind me, the one where Harper's fairy lights were strung over her bookshelf, where Mason science projects covered the kitchen table, the home I rebuilt without her. "So that's it?" she asked, barely audible. "This is goodbye?" "No," I said. "This is accountability." Then I stepped back and gently closed the door, leaving her alone on the porch with the choices she made and the consequences she never thought would come. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clean. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next Saturday morning, I sat on the front steps of the apartment, coffee in hand, watching Harper and Mason chase each other through the patch of grass that passed for a yard. Harper's laughter echoed off the walls. Her arms stretched like wings as she darted around the tree. Mason was trying to keep up, determined, messy-haired, yelling something about superheroes. For a second, I just watched, letting the sunlight hit my face and the quiet settle in my bones. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have 2 years ago, but maybe that's a point. Sometimes what breaks you reshapes you. There's a different kind of silence in this home now, one that doesn't feel hollow or cold. It's a silence that breathes. There's no yelling behind closed doors, no tension during dinner, no pretending, just little things that matter. Sunday morning pancakes, bedtime stories, goodnight hugs that linger. I'm not saying I've healed completely. Some nights, I still wake up thinking I'm back in that motel, staring at the ceiling with the sound of my world falling apart ringing in my ears. But then I remember I survived. I rebuilt, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Pain has a way of revealing the people who truly stand with you, the friends who called even when I didn't answer, the clients who kept giving me work even when rumors swirled, the lawyer who fought like hell for my kids, and above all, the kids themselves who never stopped believing that I'd show up no matter what. People like Melanie and Troy thought they could tear a man down by hitting him where it hurts most. But what they didn't understand is that real strength doesn't come from having everything go right. It comes from standing back up after everything's gone wrong. They tried to break me. Instead, they woke me up. And maybe that's a real win, not proving them wrong, but finally become the man I always hoped I'd be. Quiet, steady, present, whole. Sometimes I wonder how many people out there are living the same story I did, giving everything they have to someone who's already halfway out the door. And it makes me want to ask you, honestly, if someone betrayed you like this, would you ever forgive them? Or would you walk away forever? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, your stories. Not because I think there's one right answer, but because I know how powerful it is to feel like someone out there understands what you've been through. Maybe you're in the middle of your own storm. Maybe you've already come out the other side. Either way, you're not alone. I didn't tell this story for sympathy. I told it because there are too many people, especially men, who've been told to swallow pain and move on without ever dealing with it. But healing isn't weakness. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. And silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you're choosing peace over chaos. So if you're watching this and carrying your own weight of betrayal, heartbreak, or loss, let this be your reminder. Being betrayed is never your fault. But how you rise afterward, that's who you really are. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I hope this story gave you something real to hold on to. Now it's your turn. What would you do if someone tried to destroy everything you built? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more stories like this. We're building something honest here, something that matters. Together,